Okay, welcome everyone. I think we are ready to begin, so thank you so much for being here. I am Dr. Elizabeth Nelson. I am a faculty member in the Department of Communication, and I also teach with Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, so really happy to be here with you today. Unfortunately, we are missing the principal investigator, the lead of this project, the person who is the brains of this whole operation, whoops, as I drop my paper, Dr. Vicki Gallagher, who could not be with us today out of an abundance of caution, unfortunately. Although she has done all the things for her protection, she was exposed to COVID this weekend and therefore could not be with us. So we are here representing her certainly and her work, and it is an absolute honor to be representing this project on her behalf as folks who've worked with her in various capacities. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. Just out of curiosity to get started, and you can just show of hands if you have, how many folks have experienced the Vmlk project? Couple of folks, wonderful. And you know what, statistically in this room, that is a majority, so we love to see it, right? And sorry I can't see folks who are on the streaming site, but I hope some of you all have had a chance to see it as well. If you have, you may recognize that we're going to come up on a slide that captures a kit of parts in the not too distant future, and that you will get to see some of the different ways that you can engage with the project. But before we do that, let's just introduce ourselves to you all, and it's so nice that we all have individual microphones, so we can do this fairly easily. I already introduced myself. I will just share that I have been with the project since 2015, so shortly after the actual filming was done and the recording was done, and part of what I have been able to do is to integrate this into the public speaking curriculum, as well as be a part of the team that is doing the outreach and working with local high schools and being part of some of the other signature events. So I will pass it along now.
Hi, Michael. I'm not sure, I'm giving it just a moment, because I do talk pretty loudly, but are we better now? I'm still seeing, no, not quite, okay. Let me see, might share, yeah, here. We're gonna do a little bit of share, there we go. So we're gonna just set this one to the side, sorry, microphone. Hi, I am Cindy Rosenfeld. I am a PhD candidate in communication, rhetoric, and digital media. I have been teaching with the Vmlk Project since 2018 when I did my master's degree here, and it's hard to get somebody to leave NC State. So I'm still here doing my PhD here, and I am now working on the other side of the project, helping to develop it, expand it further, also helping to get it into our area high schools, into other colleges, and just continuing to think of ways that this project can be experienced. So I'm happy to be here with you.
I feel like I have to test it just to make sure. Hi everyone, my name is Vmlk Friedman. I am also a PhD candidate in the Communication, Rhetoric, and Digital Media PhD program. I have been with the Vmlk Project since spring 2019, so it's been a while. I helped a lot with instructions mainly, so providing instruction-based support when it comes to the Vmlk Project. I was lucky enough to also come in at a great time because I was able to go ahead and see the in-person anniversary that we did for the church, and just to really see the impact in person, which was wonderful. I have also been helpful with trying to integrate both in person and then also online iterations of the Vmlk project, as we've been through the last few years in a bit of a rocky sense. And I still work with the project now, continuing to provide support as well as resources for instructors and their classes.
Good morning. I'm Connor Tomlinson. I'm a first-year student with the Master's in Arts in Liberal Studies program with a concentration in arts rhetoric. So that rhetoric is what ties me in with this whole project. I started doing research with the project in 2020 as an undergraduate student in communication. And nowadays, I'm handling a lot of the sound technology, especially for the collective listening experience.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shelley Black. I'm a fellow and librarian from our libraries here. And I started helping this project in 2020, and in the past year, started supporting them with their use of the high-tech spaces in the libraries.
All right, thank you. And I will introduce Dr. Gallagher in her own words too, because they're better than mine. Dr. Gallagher is the principal investigator and lead scholar for the virtual MLK project. She provides the vision for the project, directs all aspects of the projects, engages with collaborators and community partners, pursues funding, and mentors students and faculty who engage with the project. And while a great summary, it's also a vast understatement of the incredible work that Vicki has done with this project over the years. We went back just one slide because I did want to make sure that you all were able to see a visual image of the kit of parts I referenced earlier. This includes the historical context, the listening experiences, the collective sound experience, the gaming simulation, the VR experience, and the Your Creative Protest engagement. And these make up this transmedia project, which we customize and make exhibitions and have experiences for classrooms, community, and scholarly use. And it's gone a vast array of places, a number of classrooms, and even the Smithsonian Museum. So it's traveled around, it's done quite a few things, and there are many, many ways to engage, and they just keep improving as our library partners will continue to discuss. Okay, so as we prepared for this panel, we were obviously thinking about this in relation to equity, which we are thinking about all the time, and trying to think in some specific ways to make the connections to today. It became clear that the Vmlk Project provides an approach to equity that is about enactment, how we enact equity through scholarship, teaching, community engagement, as well as how we enact scholarship in an invitational approach to collaboration and circulation. So these are the questions that are animating us today, and I'm just going to get closer to the podium so I can actually read them. The questions that we are thinking through today and that we'll be talking through in our responses are: what is a technology of recovery, and how and to what extent does the Vmlk Project demonstrate or achieve it? What is the value of the Vmlk Project for enacting equity in teaching, research, and civic and community life? What are the insights the project offers in relation to how to create or achieve the conditions for equity in academic and community life? And what are the embodied consequences of a project like this? And to speak to our first question, we have Cindy Rosenfeld.
Thank you. Just giving a slide of transition there. So I think we're all pretty aware of how digital tools and technologies can absolutely enhance systems of what Sophia Noble calls algorithms of oppression, or what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance, the unequitable practices of surveillance. And we're very aware of how that can happen. But what we do at the Vmlk Project is to try to look at how these technologies, these digital tools, can also be technologies of recovery. So a technology of recovery, as conceptualized from a Black humanities perspective, includes the following. It documents the history and everyday experience of African American and Black lives, transforms critique and understandings of race and digital technology by showing us what else these technologies can do, and it innovates the use of digital tools by utilizing Black studies and studying Black history. So what we want to know with our project is how and to what extent are we working as a technology of recovery? So in asking ourselves this question, here's part of what we came up with. We do achieve this in at least these three following ways. The Vmlk Project documents the history and everyday experience of African American and Black life by exploring civil rights history in Durham, North Carolina. So in this sense, it is really important our students at NC State get a chance to hear of how their local community is part of what often seems like this unlocated history that they might hear about in school. The civil rights movement happened in America, but where and to whom, and with whom? And this helps people to locate the people and to locate themselves in the civil rights history of the area that we're in. And to that extent, the Vmlk Project helps to locate, preserve, and make accessible histories that might otherwise have been lost, and make narratives, important narratives, part of our local and national memory. It also, our second part, is that it provides transformative critique and understanding of racial politics and digital technologies by engaging students and members of the public in reconsidering assumptions about the historical connection between instances of public address and social transformation. So we really want students and community at large to remember that our public address matters. It does things. How to do things with words, we do really important things with words. When this project was taken to the Smithsonian, I know that one of Dr. Gallagher's memories from that event was when a gentleman just sort of taken aback said to her, "My goodness, I forgot the level of public discourse that we were capable of in this country." And yes, I know, and we want people that we can do that still. We're still capable of that, and it still matters. And that also to come out of this experience feeling ready to participate, and students do. We see that time and time again in this project, that when they get to the end of that and they're doing their reflections, that they find that, oh, I want to go do things now, and I want to go do things that matter. And that is part of what this project does. And then the third element is that it innovates the use of digital tools by developing immersive transmedia experiences of civil rights public address. So as we talked about with that kit of parts a moment ago, we try to have many different points of access where people can experience this speech, whether it be, we have had these wonderful experiences in both Hunt and D.H. Hill, which we'll hear a little bit more about in a moment, but also, I don't know if you all know this, but in 2020, things sort of shifted around a little bit, and we all wound up online for a few years, and that included the Vmlk Project. And the project has a lot of digital assets so that we can still have these experiences, including collective listening experience, even at a distance together. There we go, just moved on. So to give you a little bit more information about this particular speech, just days after the start of the Greensboro sit-ins in February 1960, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered what would widely be a widely influential speech that was called a creative protest. The speech later became commonly known as the Fill Up the Jail speech. It was delivered on February 16, 1960, in Durham, North Carolina. As audiences learned through the Vmlk Project, it was a very influential speech because it marked the first time that Dr. King openly encouraged activists, promising the full weight of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to disrupt and break the law through nonviolent confrontation, even if it meant filling up the jails, and the speech served to catalyze the movement. King referred to this speech through the rest of his life, particularly the fill up the jails line several times, stating in an interview in 1963 that the sit-ins and the nonviolent direct action were finally helping the movement to achieve the fill up the jails goal, which was putting pressure on communities across the South to end practices of segregation in public spaces and businesses. And it was really important that this project happened here. People sometimes ask, why, if the sit-ins were occurring in Greensboro, why did Dr. King come to Durham? And it was because in Durham, a few years earlier, the Royal Ice Cream 7 had already been having the sit-ins, and Dr. King knew Reverend Douglas Moore, and Reverend Douglas Moore said, please come here to give your speech, because in Durham, we're ready. You have an audience who's ready to hear what you have to say. And we will talk a little bit more about how important that is to have a ready audience in a moment. So despite the historical and rhetorical significance of the speech, there are no known audio recordings of that talk. And the original location of the speech, the White Rock Baptist Church, was torn down just 7 years later in 1967 to make way for the Durham Freeway. So when we talk about this being technologies of recovery, these are other ways that we're talking about recovery, not only making salient lives and stories of local activists, but also how we are recovering a speech that has in some ways been lost. There was a transcript, but no recording, and then also working to capture a place, and a very important place, that has been lost. So it's just once. I'm going to click it again. There we go. In order to recreate the speech that had no known recording, the project team worked to host a recreation experience of the speech. Although the original sanctuary was torn down as a symptom of urban renewal in Durham, the recreation event was held on June 8, 2014, with the original congregation community, the White Rock Baptist Church, in their new church location. And on this slide, you can see on that upper part a lovely couple of images of that new sanctuary. From that recreation event featuring an MLK voice actor, Marvin Blanks, and with a spontaneous call and response from the congregation, the project offers a range of experiences that utilize and extend the sound experience. I want to pause just a moment on that spontaneous call and response. This is a moment that really strikes my students because sometimes they hear this and they think that we, in like a very late night show kind of way, had like an applause sign to light up to let people know what to do when. That was not the case. The congregation showed up, including many people who were there for the first time that Dr. King delivered the speech. And they responded as they were moved to respond. And that's something that we find very significant as people listen to this and think about how the speech and how the words and the movement and all of that land on their body, which we'll talk more about in a moment. So from that recreation, we were able to have these audio recordings. We've also had these structural 3D models, which you can see a bit of in here. That's what we use to set up to do the VR. And so not only was there not a recording of the speech, there's not full blueprints available of the original sanctuary and only some photographs. So there's a lot of forensic work being done to recover this work. And so this is how we recreated the virtual space and environment. And so another aspect of being a technology of recovery that we are really devoted to is making sure that we do what we like to call deep annotation, taking deep account of the contributions, the labors, and all of the communities that go into caring and making this project be what it is. So this slide shows the production team, some of the many individuals who've brought their array of talents, perspectives, and experience to this project. Doctors Derek Ham and Keon Petaway served as co-PIs and designers for the project. Mr. Shadrick Addy and Jackson Bastian worked as VR developers, and Mr. Marvin Blanks was the voice actor for the recreation event in June 2014, and Mr. Matthew Wright acted out the speech in a motion capture bodysuit after watching hours of tape showing King speaking and how he stood and gestured while doing so. In this way, the project fulfills one of Kim Gallen's key tenets for a technology of recovery as an essential element of Black digital humanities, featuring the work of Black scholars and innovators. So that was our first question. I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Nelson.
Thank you. I will take my chances with the clicker, yes. Okay, so I am just going to respond a bit to question 2. What is the value of the Vmlk project for enacting equity in teaching, research, and community and civic life? So, just a small question with a few responses, perhaps. There we go. So one of the things we're thinking about all the time is the ways that we can use this in service to teaching as justice work. So any of us who teach know that teaching has the capacity to be justice work. Doesn't mean it always is, but at its best it is. And so when we're using this project, we're trying to do a couple of different things, a lot of which I've enumerated here. One is engaging deeply with an underexplored historical moment. So for a lot of us, we are in Black History Month, so I just want to lift that up and honor that. And unfortunately, we're often exposed to or taught Black history in tiny sound bites and oversimplified, over-sanitized moments, and not taught about the deep and ongoing commitments, relationships, and events that were necessary to sustain the movement and that have antecedents before what we call the civil rights movement in the US and that have contemporary resonances today. And so it's incredibly important to take the time in class to go deeply into something, to be able to make the connections to that moment so that we can begin to make larger and more expansive connections beyond to the past, present, and future. So in that way, we're connecting people to those legacies of justice work, those legacies of social movements that we're not always completely exposed to or taught about. We offer multiple modes of experiencing history. So now, for me personally, and probably for a lot of folks in this room, give me a good, dense book full of words. I want it, yum, 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 right? But there are lots of other ways of learning, of experiencing, of gathering information, of taking things in. And so we've got embodied experiences, oral, auditory experiences, communal experiences. We're constantly thinking about accessibility, right? A book full of words is not accessible to everyone. Rooms in a library aren't always accessible to everyone. So what can accessibility look like? And even though we're in the classroom and we're thinking about this for classroom use, we're still thinking about increasing accessibility and how it moves beyond that space. We discuss what it is to recover history in and alongside community. This project is accountable to people, right? It's accountable to people who are still living, who were there in that moment. It's accountable to the people impacted then, impacted now, and it's accountable to future generations for the kind of work that it can do. And so to discuss that with our students is really important, right? Sometimes we get told that our time at university is not the real world. We're out of the real world and then we'll go back into it. Well, this is a great reminder. In fact, no, this is a moment in your real life and this is a place in the real world and we have connections. And those connections are important. And so we can activate those through this classroom work. And so that's modeling relationship and accountability with multiple stakeholders. The most important being, of course, the White Rock Baptist Church, with whom we're in deep partnership, but also with other kinds of stakeholders and other partners with whom we have these relationships, including all of the creators and scholars and folks that have been mentioned here today. We reveal how the world is transformed by so-called everyday people like us, like them. What a moment for our students, many of whom are traditional college-age students between 18 and 22, 23, to realize that the young men who started, the Greensboro Four who started that sit-in, that the folks in the Royal Ice Cream 7 are 17, 18, their age, perhaps even younger. And those are folks who are in community taking participatory action towards justice, right? That's a very activating thing to learn about. And these are everyday people, not the 4 or 5 names that they may have heard over and over again during February's in K through 12. It also encourages participation in civic life as a way to do something. In an increasingly disconnected yet hyper-mediated world, it can be really hard to figure out how to get into something, how to take action, how to do something. And while the classroom discussion is a kind of something that you do, the more important part of that is it gives them a sense of how to mobilize it in and through their bodies and how to think about what it is to be in relationship and to be a part of something that is ongoing and to take action in the world. So research can also be justice work. And again, I imagine those of us assembled here today are already committed to that. Cindy mentioned this earlier, but just to return, this is a kind of forensic rhetoric. So it's looking backwards in search of justice, right? And again, constantly thinking about what that means. It also shows the time, the energy, the resources that have gone into this project demonstrate an ongoing commitment. And commitment to doing this kind of work and to making all those other connections that I was referencing shows that research isn't about just capturing a moment of time in amber, right? It's about using it as a way to be in conversation, to be in, again, action with something else. And so just all this stuff, and the way it increases and the way it grows and develops and we make more and more relationships, shows our students and shows others what research can be. There are varieties of research. The project is continuously growing. So something that Dr. Gallagher is amazing at is when somebody has an idea or an innovation, it's like, yeah, let's explore, let's try that. She's constantly seeking new ways of making connections and looking around and seeing what is the need. We've got this partnership that we're working on with some local high schools and what do they need? We did some work with NEH, and so we've got some resources online for even younger grades, right? There's all kinds of ways that this can grow. And to see that is to see that we're not trying to hoard resources here at State, right? We're trying to spread them around and share them with others. There are so many possibilities for participation, which that kind of speaks to as well. So do you want to be a part of this, right? Do you want to grow along with it? Do you want to be invested? Then there's an opportunity to do that for lots of kinds of folks, including our undergrads and grad students. There are multiple possibilities for engagement over time. I think for a lot of us, part of why we're here is because something captivated us. Right? We are taken in and we decided, I need to know more, I need to follow this thread. And with this kind of project, there are lots of threads to follow. And so being able to see research as multimodal and research as a way of energizing the commitments of your life is pretty exciting, right? And so that's a nice thing to be a part of. You can have multiple encounters and have new experiences every time. I'm going to break off into an anecdote. We've just got this amazing VR setup in DH Hill for our undergrads. All of our undergrads in Com 110 go through this project at least once. And we've just had this. Some of the folks here today are responsible for creating that, and we went into it. And I have heard this speech no fewer than 100 times, sincerely. And yet in the VR moment, new things happened. I was like, oh my God. And I'm not a VR lover. I did not go to 3D movies in the 80s. It is not for me. But this somehow, right, this immersive experience was transformative. Yet again, I heard new things and felt new things. So that's really amazing. And then it just reminds us that, again, important people, actions, events, they're happening around us all the time. And one of the little just snippets of portable Foucault that I like to throw around is that we never know when the moment of the historical break is, right? It's only in looking back that we can tell, wow, this really mattered. And so in thinking about how we connect our students to action, this project reminds them that that night, that sweaty, hot night that you, or I guess it would have been cooler, maybe not as cold as it is now, that cool night that you went into this building, that you heard this speech, that you were activated, that you were with your people, that could be the night. And so keep going, keep doing those things, because it's really important. And finally, it's promoting civil engagement, or civic engagement, rather, although civil engagement is certainly a part of that civic engagement. First by just describing it. What is it in this moment, especially in this historical moment, which I will not speak too deeply, but which we all come in with an understanding of. What is that civic engagement that works purposefully? Describing it, modeling it. So modeling it in the modeling that we do through the project, and then modeling it through the kinds of engagement you can have with the project. Modeling it in the relationships that we have through the project with various stakeholders. Showing it in a variety of different iterations, right? The project itself is a kind of civil engagement. So how does it move, and how does it show us how we can move and how we can move together? It invites direct participation in research, again, from multiple stakeholders, right? You don't have to have a certain title or a certain role. There's a way in if you want to be in. It offers opportunities to bear witness, and I do this is my performance studies coming out, to bear witness to remembering, to putting back in the body, in the whole body, and re-engaging history through the body. Right? And that is really important. That kind of somatic response offers a different level of engagement. We create an affective relation between witnesses, between history and the present, right? We tap into those feelings, tap into those other parts of ourselves that aren't always invited into the conversation that we're having around research and scholarship, and this project really does that in a strong and purposeful way. Emotions are not only welcome, they're encouraged, right? So that's really exciting. It offers an embodied example of one moment in a larger movement. As Cindy already said, this wasn't captured in video, in audio, and we have just a kind of PDF representation. We know that it happened because of the people who know that it happened. And so that's another way of knowing and knowing through something. And then we put it back into bodies, and then we offer it for other people's bodies. So we have that kind of embodied example. And having that moment reminds us, wow, if I didn't know about this before, and if I didn't see this number of people and feel this witness, what else do I not know? Or what moments of history that sound dry when I read them were actually this full of life and this life-giving? Right? What else is there? It's a really compelling question that we can ask. Dwight Conquergood talks about, this is in his thinking about ethnography, but thinking about that a really ethical and purposeful ethnography is one that creates dialogic performance. So whatever comes out of the research basically is dialogic. It creates a dialogue with the work itself as well as with the audience with whom that work is engaged. And then it reminds us, them, anyone participated, that we are beloved community, right? It is us if we choose to be, if we engage in that way. It is literally right outside our door, and we can engage it right now. We have people, especially in North Carolina, who are operating in the spirit and words and action of Dr. King's legacy, among others. And so beloved community is present to be engaged with, if that is a choice that they want to make. And even if it doesn't result in direct participation, the awareness and the activation around it is transformative. And so for that, that's just a wonderful way to make those connections. All right.
Thank you. And transfer of the technologies. So something that the VMLK Project and this entire symposium share, as Dr. Nelson just expressed so beautifully, is this commitment to thinking through what kind of world we are building in our teaching, in our research, and in our practice. I want to highlight here how research rooted in equity can enable more equitable pedagogy and community building. So one of my great privileges as a graduate student at NC State is to teach public speaking. As a public speaking instructor, my classes are made up of students from every discipline across this campus, and together we are a community that asks how we are showing up in our civic lives and our public affairs. Now, I care that my students feel confident to speak in their classrooms, not only mine, but any of their classrooms. That's an important thing. But of course, I want them to leave feeling confident to speak as advocates in their multiple communities throughout their lives. Part of the equity work of public speaking courses is to teach students how to be ethical and efficacious public speakers. Speakers who feel both compelled and equipped to lend their voices to causes, campaigns, movements, or even business meetings in which they recognize that injustice, impartiality, or unfairness are occurring in policies, processes, and practices. And I want that for my students. But I also hope that my students are considering what it means to be ethical and efficacious public listeners. The VMLK Project helps me orient my classroom to the work and practice of being a public listener. In terms of process, the VMLK Project is dedicated to the experience of listening together. In terms of content, the VMLK Project foregrounds a speech of ethical advocacy in which Dr. King speaks passionately about matters of justice and injustice. Together, the VMLK Project offers an experience of listening together about the work of living well with one another. In other words, it helps us to practice and attend to equity work in our communities. So I want to spend a bit more time here on these linkages between public listening and community building, for I believe that community building is at the core of equity work. The White Rock Baptist Church is a historic congregation in the Triangle who have done a great deal of equity work for Durham and North Carolina. Since 1866, I just wanted to say that again to just let it land for everybody. The congregation of White Rock has been dedicated to, quote, transforming lives through service. They were the community who was ready to hear Dr. King's message in 1960, and they were ready again to continue this work when they were approached about recreating the speech. And they were ready as both efficacious and ethical public listeners and as efficacious and ethical public participants. These go together. The project is also made up of the NC State community. This project would not have happened without numerous collaborations across the campus and across disciplines. As we have just a few here on our panel, but it goes well beyond what you're seeing represented today. It is a coming together of the NC State community, but the project is simultaneously a building of NC State community. Each semester, hundreds of public speaking students experience the VMLK Project and share their reflections on how this project speaks to them as public speaking students and as citizens.
When I teach with this project, students often share the chills that they get from the speech, but they also express to me the pride that they feel that they are a part of community who did the work to recover the speech in this way. They think it is cool that the Wolfpack community did this. And I hear that stated time and again, and we need to remember, I think sometimes people think that equity work, we hear in the larger discourse right now that it's inviting people to feel bad, and that's not what my students come away with. They come away with, yes, thank goodness we're doing this. Most importantly for me are the moments that students engaging with the Vmlk Project recognize their embeddedness in this larger community that includes White Rock and North Carolina State, and this larger community as a whole. It becomes our community. Students often use the word here in their reflections, written or verbal. And think about that for a moment. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that little word is doing quite a lot. They're moved by the recognition that this speech occurred here. When they use that word, they don't have that sense of distance anymore. They're beginning to locate themselves in the communities for which they are accountable persons. When they recognize their embeddedness, they are ready to do the work of listening with, listening to, and listening for their communities. And the Vmlk Project helps people practice those skills. Through the shared listening experience, the Vmlk Project provides opportunities for people to listen with their communities. Through the recreation of a speech of great importance to the Triangle's history, people get to practice listening to their communities. And through the reflective spaces the project offers, people are invited to listen for their communities as members who can participate in the work of caring for their communities. And I believe that listening to, with, and for our communities is foundational to the work of social equity. I am going to turn it over to Malika now, who will address our next question.
Thank you, Cindy. So the question I'm going to be addressing is, what are the insights this project offers in relation to how to create or achieve the conditions for equity in academic and community life? And oftentimes when we first kind of consider this question, we first need to kind of discuss how students are engaging with Dr. King himself, especially coming into oftentimes their first year at NC State. Oftentimes when they're coming in, they're aware that Dr. King is a civil rights figure, and they are aware of his impact, but oftentimes that stops at one of his more well-known speeches of, "I have a dream." And that's where it ends. There's no localization, there's no deeper thought beyond, that is something that happened a really long time ago. And yeah, it's nice, but I also don't really see how it affects me. And so typically when we challenge students to think about a speech that oftentimes is brand new to them and oftentimes is one that they've never heard before, we consider them to figure out their own embodiment in a speech that literally in some ways happened just a short drive away from them. So when we think of the embodiment of the Vmlk Project, it creates avenues of embodiment for students to not only be part of a speech, but also to consider what that role is, and especially when it comes to establishing the historical context of it. We approach this in two different ways. So the first way that we do this is by having them, one, watch a documentary of the Vmlk Project, so they understand the impact, exactly the work that went into recreating the speech, but also through watching the Royal Ice Cream Sit-In Parlor. Oftentimes with interviews with people who are still around today, who have been at that event, who listened to the speech, and are still willing to go ahead and participate with our project. Oftentimes, students will indicate that this is their favorite part because they're able to go ahead and put physical faces to the knowledge that they're engaging with within the speech. I particularly like this quote that a student reflected upon when they're thinking about the Vmlk Project, especially how to consider how it works in present times and what it takes to what is said here and how that does apply to their different communities. Now, when students are engaging with this and they are listening to this speech for the first time, oftentimes this is opening up an avenue of different conversations with their instructors themselves. And this kind of emphasizes our role of and our consideration of kairos. One, when it comes to considering a moment of time in the historical context that led to this speech occurring, but also for students to consider this moment in time as it relates to them. This also oftentimes indicates by instructors that this provides an avenue for students to have perhaps more difficult conversations in the classroom they may not otherwise be able to have with instructors. So we see that benefit both for instructors and also for our students ourselves. Now, we are very lucky in some ways to be able to witness this because we have a reflection component that we gather from students through our Padlet. Like Cindy was mentioning earlier, oftentimes when students are reflecting about this speech in general, they oftentimes will cite words such as here, chilling. This challenged me to think about this speech in a different way that perhaps they have not considered before. When it comes to an embodiment of listening to the speech as one, oftentimes students will also mention things such as, it was incredible hearing people clap as I was listening to the speech. One student remarked, "Hey, I heard someone cough, and it reminded me that I wasn't actually in the speech, even though it kind of felt like I was." Now, when it comes to thinking about how to affect this in other ways, we challenge our students to reflect on two different concepts. One, an idea whose time has come, and one, a creative protest is. When reflecting on what a creative protest is, this is oftentimes students' chance to go ahead and figure out what exactly sets Dr. King apart, but what also sets different types of speeches apart. Oftentimes they relate this to ethos, lophos, paphos, very common in classes, to figure out exactly how Dr. King as an orator was able to be as inspiring as he was. Oftentimes students spend a lot of time reflecting on how they themselves could also alter their speeches to be a little bit more emphasizing these elements. But personally for me, my favorite reflection that they do is an idea whose time has come. The reason why I like this section as much is because students get this chance to go ahead and try to apply what we are doing here and relate it to their own lives. Students will say, you know what it's the time for, an idea whose time has come? Things like climate change, women's rights, equal representation. And this also allows students an avenue to say, you know what, Dr. King started a conversation, it's not over yet. It's still ongoing, it's still continuing. I can see that when students are thinking about their own place within NC State's community itself. For instance, one student noted how, you know what, to make more change, I should become involved with something like PAC United at NC State. And that would help to make change in the same way as Dr. King did. One of my also favorite responses that a student one time did was when they were reflecting as being a student, particularly a person of color and predominantly white university, they were glad to see this speech take place because it let them know that they belonged, that they were able to be in a space where these discussions could occur and happen. And what I particularly find profound about this quote is, as instructors, we don't have students in our classrooms for very long. We don't get to see the impact of what we're trying to do. And oftentimes when it comes to projects like this, particularly as how they're happening in a classroom, sometimes this is the only time that in the 4 years that we have a student within the university that we're asking them to reflect on equity in this way and to reflect on how this applies to their lives, particularly as where they are currently. And so what I really appreciate from this project and from the students and instructors I have interacted with is that we can see this happening in real time. We can see this reflection and this consideration of how the Vmlk Project is impacting their lives, both academically, but also challenging them to think of it in a broader context. All right, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to our library partner, Shelley.
So I'll be talking about how the libraries have supported this project in creating equity and advancing it in our communities. So since 2015, the libraries has partnered with this team on multiple public exhibitions. While the library buildings are open to all, this project has given multitudes of visitors an intentional reason to visit the Hunt Library and now the Hill Library. This has illuminated not only how meaningful the civil rights history is to our communities, but also how this particular partnership between the libraries and the Vmlk Project fosters equity. So first we have spaces, technology, and staff. We at the libraries provide this infrastructure, which is needed for large-scale projects like this. We strive to make our spaces and services equitable and accessible, and our high-tech spaces, which are available to all, allow for a historical recovery project to be accessed by students, scholars, and the public. Whether it's our teaching and visualization lab or our VR studio, these are shared resources for NC State. This means you don't need grant funding or you don't need to be a member of a specific department or lab to use these spaces. So what happens is faculty and students from different disciplines can work together on a project like this seamlessly. And our staff at the libraries provide technical consultations for the NC State community, helping people use these high-tech spaces. Many librarians and other staff members have contributed to this project over the years and continue to do so, from developing content for video walls and our immersive tech spaces to program planning. Next, quite organically, the Vmlk Project has facilitated the development of a community of practice here, where library staff and team members have been able to learn from each other. So it's been quite a reciprocal relationship. The project team has included student employees from the library's VR studio, and we've also shaped our services in response to this collaboration over the years. And because this is one of the first projects to use the brand new visualization studio at the Hill Library, which is a 360-degree immersive space, we've already been able to improve our workflows and documentations for future users there. And lastly, through public engagement, as well as pedagogical development and curricular integration, Vmlk has resulted in building and strengthening relationships between researchers, the community, and the libraries. And it has set a benchmark, really, for how projects in the library's high-tech spaces can engage the public equitably.
All right, sweet. So I'm going to play a quick excerpt of the sound experience.
If only to save ourselves from bitterness, we need the vision to see the ordeals of this generation as an opportunity to transfigure ourselves and American society. Let us not fear going to jail. If the official threatens to arrest us for standing up for our rights, we must answer by saying that we are willing and prepared to fill up the jails of the South.
Of that one iconic line from the speech, the fill up the jails line. And we've heard a lot about the Vmlk Project as a resource for ethical teaching, ethical and equitable research, and a bit about the community building that's gone into making this project happen. But as the sound tech guy, I'm always thinking about the embodied experience and the embodied consequences of a project like this. Not just what the project can do for us, but what it does to us as a listening audience. Like Dr. Nelson pointed out, it's fundamentally about the somatic response. It's about affect. Sound is felt tactily in the body, and it's mostly mostly processed without conscious intervention, and only afterwards does a sort of logos response happen. But on the question, there's two consequences that I'd like to talk a little bit about. First, thinking of this as a technology of recovery, and specifically as a technology of sound recovery, one of the really powerful parts about the experience is that audience engagement that you might have heard. Public address in America is mostly based on a very specific rhetorical tradition where there's one speaker and the audience listens quietly, patiently, until the speaker gives them nonverbal permission to start cheering, laughing, what have you. But this is a different kind of oratory. This is a call and response. And that style that you hear in Dr. King's speech comes from Black religious, Black rhetorical traditions and invites the audience to add punctuation to help collectively create meaning in the speech that's not there otherwise. Probably the perfect example from the speech is that one line, "We are willing and prepared to fill up the jails of the South." There's this organic, rhythmic back and forth where the audience is agreeing after each word, yes, we are willing, yes, we are prepared. And it gives a melody to the line that you wouldn't have if there wasn't this audience engagement. So, again, if students don't learn about the recreation process, they think that this is all scripted. But it's spontaneous. It's not a composition, it's a jam session. A lot of our sonic practices reflect a bias towards the lone speaker. Audience is peripheral. And this is reflected in the sound technology as well. When you're recording a speech, you want to record the speaker, and not much attention is paid to the audience, or sometimes it's deliberately cut out. But for the Vmlk project, we use 3 different stereo mic setups to capture the entirety of the speech as accurately as possible, attending to both the speaker and to the audience, and to the ambient sounds of the church, to everything that goes into a sonic experience like this. And it's the same thing when I'm mixing for different spaces or for different kinds of experience. I spent more time working on the sounds of the audience than on Dr. King's voice because it's so complex, so rich, and it's so important not just to the experience, but to giving students a chance to engage in all kinds of listening practices, to be more attuned to the ambient environment. Like Cindy said earlier also, this is about learning to be effective, ethical public listeners, which is why we're calling attention to the fact that listening isn't passive. Listening is active, it's always participatory, and often the audience is responsible for creating meaning just like the speaker is. Now my next point, it says generating movement up there. It's not often that you get to experience such an important historical speech in an immersive way like this. I don't know if the PowerPoint audio quite does it justice when you're in there with the 7.1 surround sound. But when students enter the space for the collective listening experience, with or without historical context, they start to pay attention to how the speech moves them. And that's what I'm getting at here. Of course, the speech can be moving emotionally. It's a common way people have described this speech. A lot of the feedback is that it's moving. But when a speech compels its audience to cheer, to engage in the call and response that you hear, that's literal movement. You're moving your body in response to the speech. When a listening experience is immersive to the point that audiences want to explore the space, feel what it's like in different audience perspectives, that's another kind of movement. When students write in their responses that they feel this burning desire to go out and take action against the injustice they see in the world today, 60 years later, that's also what I mean by generating movement. And this is why thinking about affect is crucial to the Vmlk project, especially how a sonic experience puts people in all sorts of different kinds of motion. And that's why the Vmlk project has been such an important and engaging part of the COM 110 curriculum and how we teach rhetoric. It's not about like going over records, finding out how many people in this audience decided to go out and engage in civil disobedience because of the speech. It's about imagining how people experience the speech, being able to translate that into your own embodied experience. Learning how the coming together of Dr. King's oration with the space, with the audience, managed to speak to a specific historical moment in such a powerful way that people born 40 years later still find it relevant and moving. Thank you.
Thank you. Oop, is this working? Hello, hello? No. Okay, I think we're working. Which one was working?
musical microphones? Is this one? Yeah, okay.
All right. All right. So these are, just as to review, our 4 questions. I want to recognize that we're right at the end of our time, so we don't really have time for a formal Q&A, but we absolutely, everyone in this project welcomes your questions, so please feel free to reach out to Dr. Vicki Gallagher. I think our contact information is available in the program. You can reach out to me, so certainly reach out to us, and some of us may linger for just a few minutes after if you want to quickly touch base, but otherwise, thank you to everyone who is here. Thank you for your presence today. Thank you for everyone who's streaming. Thanks for being a part of this, and we really appreciate your time and engagement.